Hey everyone, Aaron M. Wilson here to welcome you to the first edition of the Weekly Prescription. Now for this first segment we will be discussing diabetes. Now let's start off with a quick fact check. 29.1 million Americans, or 9.3% of the population here in the United States, have diabetes. Now this is a statistic taken from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now before we get any further in this discussion, let's first define what diabetes is. Now, diabetes is a group of diseases that causes the blood glucose levels to rise above normal, and this is due to the lack of insulin produced in the pancreas. Now, diabetes is also an autoimmune disease, and we will kind of dive into that later on as well. But first, we're going to talk about type 1 diabetes, then we'll move on to type 2 diabetes. Now, first, type 1 diabetes has been referred to as juvenile diabetes in the past, and it's usually diagnosed in children and young adults. Now, according to the American Diabetes Association, only 5% of people are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes or actually have it. Now, for all intents and purposes, we're going to call it T1D for short. Now, in T1D, the body does not produce any insulin whatsoever, and insulin is a hormone needed to control the blood glucose levels within the body. Now, here's a little bit of biology here. Typically, when a person ingests carbohydrates, they in turn turn to sugar, and the pancreas secretes beta cells which make insulin to regulate the person's blood glucose levels, or BG for short. Now, without insulin inside of the body cannot do this properly, and this will cause a rapid increase in blood sugar levels, and this is a medical term referred to as hyperglycemia. Now let's move on to type 2 diabetes. Now, type 2 diabetes is when the body uses insulin or produces it but does not know how to use it properly. And this is also referred to as insulin resistance. Now, over time, the pancreas, will make less and less insulin, and the blood glucose levels cannot be regulated properly by the body. Now, let's actually move on to some of the symptoms that are related to type 1 diabetes. Now, these symptoms will include excessive thirst, frequent urination, weight loss, bedwetting in young children, increased hunger, irritability along with mood changes, fatigue, blurred vision, and in some cases for females, a yeast infection. Yes, this is true. Now, for type 2 diabetes, or T2D for short, the symptoms are basically the same as above, but they also include frequent infections, slow healing sores, darkened skin, and the darkened skin portion is actually a condition referred to in the medical world as acanthosis nigricans. Now, that's if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Now, let's move on to how to treat diabetes. Now, there's really no set in stone way of treating it until there's a cure for it. But until then, there is a thing called insulin, and this must be administered to the diabetic, thus calling it insulin therapy. Now, let's talk about the 5 main types of insulin used for dealing with diabetes. There is Humalog, Humulin, otherwise known as NPH, Novolog, Lantus, and Levemir. Now, Humalog and Novolog are 2 types of short-acting insulins. Now, they last anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. This is for the Humalog, mind you. And it will start working in the first half an hour it's injected. Novolog will particularly last 3 to 5 hours. So some of you may ask me, which one's the better deal? Well, I have an answer for you. I don't know. Talk to your endocrinologist about that one. Now, the endocrinologist, the person who specializes in hormonal imbalances, and this is kind of the case for diabetes. Now, once again, insulin is a hormone that is produced within the body to maintain the blood sugar levels. And a high or low blood sugar, those aren't really good things. Hyperglycemia, or high blood sugars, they occur when the body does not have enough insulin to break down the sugars consumed. This can result in something called DKA, or again in the medical world, diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, this is when the ketones develop inside of the body and eat away the fat cells. Not really a good thing if you ask me. Now, high blood sugars can result if this is not treated soon. And later on, if they definitely aren't treated soon, death can result. And that's a bad thing as well. Now let's move on to low blood sugars. Remember when I talked about hyperglycemia earlier? There's this thing called hypoglycemia. Now, hypoglycemia is when too much insulin is introduced in the body and there are not enough carbohydrates ingested to compensate for the insulin administered. Now, if this low is not treated soon, seizures or collapsing can result. Now, over time, these continued seizures can cause brain damage, which I doubt anyone wants later on down the road. blood. Yeah, not really a good thing. But let's kind of wrap it up with what I was saying about autoimmune diseases earlier. Now, because diabetes is actually an autoimmune disease, this means that basically the body thinks that the pancreas is a foreign object, and it will send antibodies or cells to attack the pancreas. And this will force all the insulin to drain out of the body. And this is how a person becomes diabetic in the end. Not really a good thing, but I just wanted to raise awareness for this issue for this week. And on that note, that will do it for this week's edition of Weekly Prescription. I will see you all next week.